Hello, my name is Ashley Kunis. I go to GRCC and I'm in the Art of Being Human class. And for our final exam, we're doing the book Anthills of the Savannah by Chinua Achebe. And we each have a certain section that we're doing. And I'm going to tell you about my section, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I think of the book and give you a couple quotes. So I'm doing chapters 5 through 8, and I just want to start off with chapter 5, and this is where Kayam, Patrice, Chris, Dick, and Mad Medico are all hanging out and drinking and talking about all the old times they used to have in college. They're even talking about Sam's personality and his demeanor before becoming president of the country. And it's really interesting that they don't really look upon Sam too well, it doesn't look like. Because Mad Medico actually is talking to Dick, his friend from England, and he goes on to say, "You know something, Dick? The most awful thing about power is not that it corrupts absolutely, but that it makes people so utterly boring, so predictable, and just plain uninteresting." I found this quote very interesting because you think people strive for power. That's why when you work at a company, you always want to raise. You always want to continue to grow in the company so you have more power and you have more authority. In this case, Mad Medico doesn't really think so. Most people want that power, but I don't think Mad Medico looks at that power as a good thing. He's not striving for that power, maybe because he knows that power can corrupt people. So I just found that quote very interesting from the book. That just shows that, there is a little bit of good in Mad Medico, that he's not striving to be corrupted with power by any means. In chapter 6, we go on to Bernice. She gets a phone call from His Excellency inviting her to a little small party that's just for the two of them. Nobody else is invited, just Patrice. And she goes out there and they have dinner and drinks. And he takes her hand and brings her to the dance floor and they start to dance, and it probably is getting a little uncomfortable just because she's with Chris. And it's just getting to a point where it probably shouldn't be. But then His Excellency proceeds to take her hand and walk her to the balcony, and then he tries to rape her. And Patrice stops him and goes on to talk about this story about her back in Washington. And then His Excellency is not happy with this response. He's actually very infuriated with her and goes on to say, "Don't be such a racist, Patrice. I'm surprised at you, a girl of your intelligence." Which he's obviously not very happy. He's pretty mad, actually. So he storms off and leaves her by herself on the balcony. And she's very, very upset at this point. She is crying. She's got tears just running down her face. She's bawling her eyes out. And she just kind of thinks of what just happened. I'm sure she was very shocked at what just happened. And then, his servant comes out and he says, "There is a car waiting downstairs to take you home." So obviously it made him mad enough that he wanted her to go home. And I have to give it to Patrice quite a bit because, she could have just given in and just allowed it to happen, but she said no, and she showed a lot of courage, which I really appreciate. I don't think most women would have been able to have that courage in fear of their life or what could have happened to Chris. You have no idea. So I commend her for standing up for herself and saying no to that. That's very good on her part, and I'm very glad that she did that for herself. In chapter 7, we're still in Patrice's side of the story. And at chapter 7, she's kind of just sitting and thinking to herself about her entire life. She's just thinking about, her life growing up, her womanhood, her parents, her relationships. And it's taken her months to write down all this historic stuff that's taken place here in Africa. She has no idea where to begin. She's fumbling around, erasing things. They don't sound right. And she remembers and reminisces back to 1940 when she first learned about schools in West Africa from her headmaster at the school that she was visiting for her father in England. Patrice also remembers her father and abusive to her and her sisters, and believes that behind closed doors was also abusive to their mother as well. So she's just kind of reminiscing on her life, and she's really just, I guess, really thinking to herself, how did I get here? How I became who I am today, and what has this stuff done to me over the years? And she even mentions now, as an adult, is surrounded by high society people, a higher class of people. But she wasn't always in that high class of society. Like, she met these people before they came high class. Like, for example, her boyfriend Chris was only a journalist when they met, not the commissioner of information. So it was just kind of giving you a little more in-depth insight to Patrice's life and how she got to where she is today. And it really, I have to give it to Patrice a lot to go through that much, hardship in life and still be able to come out a very strong woman. I have to commend her on that. That's a very good trait in a human being, man or woman. If you're able to deal with abuse and neglect like that, it's very rewarding, I think, in the end, to know that you were strong enough to deal with that. And lastly but not least, in chapter 8, we're kind of at the point where a few days have gone by since the event with His Excellency. And Chris, a few days later, comes in and asks about, how'd the party go? How did everything go? And Patrice is very angry with Chris, saying that, he should have, he's just an uncaring attitude of not calling or visiting her earlier. And, Chris has no idea what's happened, and he apologizes to her when he discovers that she's just crying and bawling her eyes out. And to reconcile, they make love and get some lunch together. And after a few sexual bouts, Patrice tells Chris what happened between His Excellency and her, and how he attempted to rape her. And this news to Chris infuriates him with his boss's randy behavior. In order to pacify him, Patrice tries to divert Chris's attention to the need of reconciling with his friend Khayyam. Chris is too reluctant to bring himself to talking terms with his friend. However, Chris feels trapped in a very, state which he cherishes his friend, but he doesn't really know what to do. And even though it's pretty natural for Chris to be angry at His Excellency for trying to rape his girlfriend, which that's understandable, we kind of expect at the same time for him to kind of, I guess, give Patrice a little bit of praise for not giving in to that and not, praising her for her courage in going through that. It has actually nothing in the book at all says anything that where he actually praised her and comforted her and told her, wow, it's amazing that you could actually stand up to him, and I appreciate that. It has nothing in here saying anything like that. So it's kind of an oversight to his pride and how proud he is, and it just shows a sign of weakness in Chris, I think, because he's very prideful of his feelings. And that is my summary of Anthills of the Savannah. I hope you all enjoyed my little spiel here, and hope to see y'all soon. Bye.